Have you ever found yourself sitting at your desk, maybe, I don't know, late on Thursday night, the glow of your monitor lighting up a half-empty mug of cold coffee, just staring at this incredibly dense block of text in your Greek New Testament?
Oh, yeah. Usually right when the sermon outline is due.
Exactly. And if you've been to seminary, or, if you're in the trenches of pastoral ministry right now, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You've done the hard work. You have successfully parsed every single aorist verb on the page.
Right. You've got the flashcards memorized.
You do. And you've meticulously identified the grammatical cases of every noun. Like, you know exactly which ones are dative of advantage and which ones are accusative of direct object.
You might have even color-coded your syntax tree on a whiteboard.
Which is great. I mean, we love a good syntax tree. But here's the problem. Despite having this microscopic, almost forensic understanding of every individual word on that page, you find yourself completely stuck trying to figure out how to actually preach the flow of the passage.
Yeah, it's so frustrating.
It really is. You're looking at this brilliantly detailed diagnostic landscape of grammar, but the overarching meaning, like the rhetorical thrust of the author, is just completely murky. You've analyzed the trees to death, but you've totally lost the forest.
It is a profoundly common experience, and honestly, it is the absolute definition of exegetical muddy waters. I mean, you have all the data, right? But the architecture of the author's thought is somehow slipping right through your fingers.
Exactly.
We train so heavily in morphological parsing in our first year of Greek that we sometimes forget a crucial reality. The text wasn't written as a vocabulary quiz. It was written as a cohesive, communicative event, a living document.
Yeah, if you've ever felt that exact pain, welcome to this deep dive. Today, we aren't looking at more vocabulary lists or running through paradigm charts. We're giving you the architectural blueprints to the language. Our mission today is to bridge that agonizing gap between micro-level grammar and macro-level meaning.
And it is a big gap.
It is. And we are going to do that by pulling from a really seminal work in linguistics. We're looking at Chapter 1 of M.A.K. Halliday and Hasan's Cohesion in English, which gives us what they call the theoretical architecture of language.
But we are not just going to leave it in the realm of abstract linguistic theory, because, let's be honest, that doesn't help you on a Sunday morning.
No, it definitely doesn't.
Right. So we are going to synthesize Halliday and Hasan's framework, which is known as systemic functional linguistics, or SFL for short, with highly practical Greek New Testament discourse analysis. Specifically, we're going to lay this SFL framework over the Gospel of John and the First Epistle of John.
Oh, I can't wait to get into 1 John.
It's so good. The goal for you listening today is to show you exactly how understanding abstract linguistic architecture profoundly changes how you read, how you exegete meaning, and ultimately how you preach and teach the biblical text.
Okay, so let's unpack this theoretical core first, because before we even touch the Greek text, we actually have to change the way we define what a text even is.
Right, we have to completely rewire our assumptions.
Yeah, because Halliday and Hasan have this foundational rule that completely blew my mind when I first encountered it. It goes against almost everything we intuitively assume about reading. They argue that a text is not a grammatical unit.
Yeah. It is not just a super sentence.
Which is exactly what I used to think. I mean, I assumed that there was this neat mathematical progression to language, just as words make up phrases and phrases make up clauses and clauses combine to make sentences.
Then a text is just the next size up.
Right, the next size up on the Russian nesting doll of grammar.
Yeah.
Sentences make up paragraphs, paragraphs make up chapters, chapters make up text. You just keep nesting the dolls. But Halliday and Hasan say absolutely not. That is a fundamental misunderstanding of what language is doing.
It is a critical paradigm shift. And honestly, if you miss this, the rest of discourse analysis won't make sense. Halliday and Hasan clarify that you cannot define a text by its size or by the rules of constituency.
Constituency meaning?
Constituency is exactly that Russian nesting doll idea you just mentioned. Smaller structural grammatical units combining to make larger structural units. And that framework works perfectly, but only up to the sentence level.
Okay.
Once you hit the period at the end of a sentence, structural grammar stops. A text, therefore, is not defined by structural grammar. It is a semantic unit. It's a unit of meaning.
A semantic unit. Let me make sure I have this crystal clear. So a text does not consist of sentences, the way like a wall consists of bricks. Rather, a text is realized through sentences.
Precisely. The sentences are the medium, not the substance. If we try to apply sentence-level structural rules to a whole chapter of the Gospel of John, we're going to get incredibly frustrated.
But they don't apply.
Exactly, because the structural integration that holds a clause together simply does not exist across sentence boundaries. Between sentence A and sentence B, there are no grammatical restrictions dictating the sequence. Grammatically, you can put any sentence next to any other sentence. You need something else to hold the meaning together. You need what they call cohesion.
Cohesion. Okay, let me try an analogy here. If syntax and grammar are the skeleton of a sentence like the rigid bones that give a clause its specific unyielding structure, is it fair to say cohesion is the nervous system that connects the whole body across the gaps between the bones?
Oh, I love that analogy. Yes, let's lean into that. The skeleton provides the local structure. A femur has to connect to a pelvis. That's syntax. But the nervous system cohesion is what allows the foot to talk to the brain, traversing all those different structural domains. Cohesion refers specifically to non-structural relations that link elements across sentence boundaries where formal constituent structure no longer applies. It bridges the gaps. It is the connective tissue of meaning.
And when those semantic relations interlock properly across those gaps, when that nervous system is firing correctly, Halliday and Hasan say the text achieves something they call texture.
Texture is the defining property of a text. It is what distinguishes a unified, cohesive discourse from just an aggregated, random pile of disconnected sentences.
Let's bring this down to earth with a tangible example, because I think we do this intuitively all day long without realizing it.
Oh, absolutely.
Halliday and Hasan use this classic, wonderfully mundane cookbook example in the source material. Imagine you are in your kitchen, you're reading a recipe, and it says, quote, "Wash and core 6 cooking apples. Put them into a fireproof dish."
It seems so incredibly simple, doesn't it? Like a child could understand it.
Right.
But linguistically, beneath the surface, there is a complex semantic mechanism at work there that creates that texture.
Right. It hinges entirely on the word them in the second sentence. Them is what they call the presupposing item. It presupposes that you, the reader, already know what it is referring to based on prior information. And 6 cooking apples in the first sentence is the presupposed item.
And when your brain instinctively connects the presupposing item them to the presupposed item apples, you create a cohesive tie. That single instance of a semantic relation is the tie. Let's look at what happens if we remove that tie. If you walked into the kitchen and saw a sticky note on the counter that just said, "Put them into a fireproof dish," all by itself, the text falls apart into nonsense. It has no texture. You are left looking around the kitchen asking, "Put what in the dish?" The car keys. The mail.
The dog.
Right. The interpretation of the second sentence is entirely dependent on the first. That dependence is cohesion.
It's so seamless we do it without thinking. But before we get to how this actually looks in the Greek New Testament, we need to understand why language operates this way. We need to briefly map where cohesion fits into the broader SFL framework. Because SFL argues that all language is simultaneously performing 3 primary metafunctions.
Yes.
And if we don't grasp these 3, we really won't understand what the biblical author is actually trying to achieve.
Right, and understanding these 3 metafunctions helps you see the multidimensional nature of communication. Let's break them down. First, you have the ideational metafunction. This is language as representation. It is the speaker acting as an observer, conveying experiential content, facts, and logical relations. It's the basic what happened of the text.
Let's use a real-world communication breakdown to explain this because, well, the terms can feel a bit academic. Imagine a husband and wife arguing about the electric bill. The husband says, "The bill was due on Tuesday, and the money wasn't in the checking account."
Classic.
Right. That is the ideational metafunction. He is communicating raw data, dates, accounts, facts.
Exactly. But we all know that is not the only thing happening in that conversation.
Definitely not.
Which brings us to the second category, the interpersonal metafunction. This is language's interaction. This is the speaker acting as an intruder into the speech situation. It covers roles, attitudes, judgments, moods, modalities. It's the relational dynamic between the speaker and the listener.
Right. So in our electric bill argument, if the husband says, "The bill was due on Tuesday," and the money obviously wasn't in the checking account, again, those words obviously and again aren't just conveying data.
No, they're conveying a lot more.
They're conveying judgment, frustration, and relational hierarchy. That is the interpersonal metafunction at work. It's the tone. It's the relational posture.
Precisely. So you have the data ideational and the relational dynamic interpersonal. But neither of those can actually function as a coherent message without the third category, the textual metafunction. This is the text-forming capability of the language. It comprises the resources a language has for actually creating a text, making it operationally relevant in a given context.
And cohesion sits proudly right there as the non-structural component of the textual metafunction. It's the catalyst.
Yeah.
The source material notes that without cohesion, the rest of the semantic system, the ideational facts, and the interpersonal tone just cannot be effectively activated.
You can have brilliant, profound theological ideas, and you can have a strong, passionate relational tone, but without the textual metafunction providing cohesion, all you have is a disjointed word salad. You just have a guy yelling random facts into a void. Cohesion organizes the ideas and the relational dynamics into a navigable stream of thought.
Okay, so if I am looking at a text, how do I actually spot this texture being built? What are the specific tools? Because Halliday and Hasan give us this brilliant continuum of cohesive resources.
They do, and rather than just giving a list, let's think about how a writer actually weaves this fabric together. They have a toolkit that stretches from purely grammatical tools on one side to purely vocabulary-based tools on the other. They identify 5 primary types of cohesive ties. Let's start on the grammatical end. If a writer wants to refer back to a participant without saying their full name over and over, what do?
They use a pronoun,
Right.
which SFL calls reference. This is the retrieval of specific referential identity, he, she, it, they. A pronoun doesn't contain meaning inherently. It acts as a pointer to something else.
Exactly. Now, what if the writer wants to replace an entire phrase or clause so they don't have to repeat a really clunky sentence? They use substitution. This is replacing one linguistic item with a dummy item. For example, if someone says, "I don't care where I get to as long as I get somewhere," and you reply, "Oh, you're sure to do that," the phrase "do that" substitutes for the entire concept of getting somewhere. It keeps the texture tight.
Okay, I track with that. But what happens when the text deliberately hides information? Like, is there a way a literal blank space can act as cohesive glue?
Yes, and it's fascinating. That is the third tool, ellipsis. It is effectively substitution by zero. It is the deliberate omission of an item that is required by the structural expectation of the sentence, but the listener can flawlessly fill in the blank because of the immediate prior text.
Because the context supplies it.
Exactly. We see this constantly in fast-paced dialogue, and it binds speakers together tightly.
We'll actually see a beautiful example of that in Johannine in a few minutes. Then, as we move along the continuum, occupying sort of the borderline between grammar and vocabulary, we have conjunction. And we need to be really careful here, because this isn't just the word in connecting two nouns. In SFL, conjunction is the specification of logical semantic connections between entire propositions.
It's how ideas relate to one another logically. Additive, adversative, causal, temporal.
And finally, occupying the purely vocabulary side of the continuum, we have lexical cohesion. This is coherence achieved strictly through vocabulary choice. It is the writer building texture by using the same word again, or a synonym, or using words that naturally co-occur in the same semantic domain, which linguists call collocation, like using the words boy and girl or hot and cold.
Right. To really grasp how vital these ties are and how much our brains rely on them to create meaning, you have to look at what happens when they get mixed up. There is a great piece of schoolboy humor from the source material that illustrates this perfectly.
Oh, I love this example.
I want to break this down word by word. The joke goes like this. Person A says, "Time flies." And person B responds, "You can't, they fly too quickly."
It's an objectively terrible joke.
It's just so bad.
But as a linguistic specimen, it is a masterpiece. Let's deconstruct why our brains actually find that funny, because the humor relies entirely on a deliberate, forced misinterpretation of presuppositions and cohesive ties.
Right. So person A says, "Time flies." Normally, immediately, we read time as a noun, the abstract concept, and flies as an active verb. It's a common idiom. But the punchline forces the listener to do a complete, rapid reevaluation of the grammar.
Let's look at person B's response. You can't. Here, person B is employing ellipsis. The structural expectation of that sentence is, you can't, time flies. But to make sense of, you can't, our brain realizes we can't use time as an abstract noun anymore.
No, we have to flip it.
Person B has maliciously reinterpreted time as an imperative verb, meaning to measure the speed of, with a stopwatch. And they have reinterpreted flies as a plural noun like the annoying little winged insects. You can't measure the speed of the insects.
It's brilliant. And then person B adds the justification. They fly too quickly. The word they is a reference tie, pointing backward to the newly established plural noun, the flies. And the repetition of the word fly as a verb at the end is lexical cohesion. The joke only works. It only produces a laugh because you, the listener, are forced to rapidly rewire all the cohesive ties you thought you had securely established in the first sentence.
Oh man, that is so true.
It shows you exactly how actively and unconsciously our brains are constantly hunting for these connections to build a semantic unit.
That hunting process, that search for the referent, is what SFL calls directionality. Cohesion is fundamentally a relational concept. The direction in which a linguistic item points for its interpretation actually determines how we classify it and how we understand the flow of the text.
And there are three main directions our brains look. First, and most common, is anaphora. This is backward pointing.
Anaphora.
Anaphora is the standard operating procedure for language. It is the unmarked primary direction for building narrative continuity. The presupposed element comes first, and the presupposing item comes later and points back to it. Going back to our cookbook. Wash the apples, put them in a dish. The pronoun them points backward to retrieve apples.
Then there is the opposite, cataphoric, which is forward pointing. This is where the presupposed element actually follows the presupposing item. The pronoun comes before the noun it represents. This creates incredible anticipation. This is how to get the best results. You let the berries dry overnight. This doesn't point to a previous sentence. It points forward to the entire instruction that follows. It builds suspense.
And finally, there is exara, which is context pointing. This is when the reference points outside the verbal text entirely, out into the immediate physical context of situation. If you and I are walking through a botanical garden, and I point and say, "Did the gardener water those plants?" The word "those" doesn't point backward or forward to a previous sentence in our conversation. It points to the physical, tangible plants sitting in front of us in the real world.
Which raises an incredibly important theoretical question that has huge implications for studying ancient texts. If exophor points to the outside physical world, does it actually create textual cohesion? Does it bind the words on the page together?
And the short answer is no. Halliday and Hasan note that only endophoric relations, meaning anaphora, the backward pointing, and cataphora, the forward pointing, the internal ones, only those create true textual cohesion. Exophor does not bind two internal elements of a written text together.
It just points to the real world.
Exactly. However, exophora is absolutely vital for understanding the context of situation. It grounds the language in reality. But for our purposes, when we are analyzing a static, written, ancient text like the Greek New Testament, we are primarily hunting for endophoric ties, the internal textual nervous system.
Okay, here is where it gets really interesting. Let's make the bridge to the Greek text. Let's put on our exegetical hard hats, because everything we just talked about, texts as semantic units, cohesion bridging structural gaps, tracking participants via directionality. This is exactly the rescue boat we need when dealing with the original languages.
Especially Koine Greek. We have to remember the material reality of the text. In Koine, sentence boundaries are notoriously fluid. You don't have neat, modern punctuation in the original uncial manuscripts. You don't have indented paragraphs or, red letters.
You definitely don't.
You often have massive blocks of text glued together by paratactic connectors, most famously the word chi, which just means and.
The dreaded chi string. If you have ever tried to translate a chapter of Mark's Gospel or John's Gospel, you know exactly what this is. It's just, and this happened, and he went there, and he said this, and then this. If you rely only on structural sentence-level grammar to map that out, you will literally go insane.
Oh, completely.
You will draw syntax trees that take up an entire whiteboard and tell you absolutely nothing about the meaning. That is why Halliday and Hasan's non-structural cohesion framework is the absolute perfect tool for mapping biblical architecture. It frees you from the tyranny of the punctuation mark. It allows you to track the semantic flow regardless of where the editors place the periods.
Let's look at a prime example of this, anaphoric tracking in the Gospel of John. How does John, as an author, keep track of who is doing what across complex narrative boundaries without confusing the reader? Let's look at John 1.1920.
Oh, this is a great text. In English, it reads, and this is the testimony of John, when the Jews sent priests and Levites from Jerusalem to ask him, "Who are you?" He confessed and did not deny, but confessed, "I am not the Christ."
Now, let's slow down and look at the Greek mechanics of the cohesive ties in that passage. The Greek verbs for he confessed and did not deny are homologexen and ne sato.
Okay, those are aorist verbs, third-person singular.
Yes, and as any first-year Greek student knows, in Greek, the subject pronoun is often baked right into the verb's morphological ending. We call these zero-subject inflections because there isn't a separate noun acting as the subject right next to the verb. The he is hiding inside the ending of homo oh gesen.
So grammatically, structurally, within the bounds of that specific tiny clause, the subject's just he. But semantically, cohesively, according to SFL, that zero-subject inflection isn't just a grammatical placeholder. It is an anaphoric tie pointing like a laser beam all the way back up the paragraph to the nominal head of the passage, to Ishanu John the Baptist.
Exactly, and the author heightens this tie to ensure the reader doesn't lose the thread. In the final clause of verse 20, I am not the Christ, John uses the explicit, emphatic first-person pronoun agoh. The text says, Hoti agoh uk eimi ho Christos. That explicit, punchy agoh also coheres anaphorically with John the Baptist.
So what does this mean for the person actually studying this text in an MDiv program or, prepping a sermon? If you just parse the verb homo loh gesen in a vacuum on a flashcard, it means he confessed. Great. But if you stop there, you lose the participant tracking.
You lose all flow.
You lose the high-density anaphoric chain that maintains the narrative boundary of the pericope. You have to learn to see the cohesive tie, not just the morphology. The tie is what tells you the text is still entirely focused on John the Baptist's testimony, even after introducing the priests and Levites.
Now let's flip the lens and look at the other direction, cataphora, forward-pointing ties. The Gospel of John loves anaphora for keeping its narrative character straight, but 1 John. The Epistle of 1 John is an absolute masterclass in cataphora.
Yes. I get so incredibly excited about this because once you see it, it totally changes how you read the epistle. Look at 1 John 1.5. And this is the message we have heard from him and proclaimed to you, that God is light, and in him is no darkness at all.
Let's trace the semantic ties there. How is the author building this texture?
The author uses the demonstrative pronoun hau wte, which translates to this. And this is the message. Now, normally a pronoun points backward, but if you look back at verses 1 through 4 of 1 John, there's no reference for this. He hasn't stated the message yet. He talked about seeing and touching the word of life, but he hasn't given the actual proposition.
So linguistically, it cannot be anaphoric. The referent doesn't exist in the prior text, therefore it must be cataphoric.
Right. Its presupposition is left hanging in the air, and it is resolved forward by the content clause introduced by the word hoht, that God is light.
He does the exact same thing again in 1 John 3.23. And this hau wte is his commandment, that we should believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ.
I always liken this cataphoric structure to a rhetorical drum roll. The author is deliberately using syntax to say to his congregation, pay attention, stop looking around. The thesis statement is coming. By using the forward-pointing pronoun before providing the content, he creates a semantic gap, like a moment of suspense in the listener's mind. What is the message? What's the commandment? The cataphoric tie sets up the thematic thesis for the entire chapter that follows. It is a brilliant homiletical move.
It is brilliant, and it shows that the author of 1 John isn't just tossing random mystical thoughts on a page, which is how some people read 1 John. He is carefully, deliberately constructing a homiletic argument designed to capture and hold attention.
Okay, let's move further down the cohesion continuum, moving away from grammatical pronouns and into lexical cohesion. Because if 1 John uses cataphora for its drum rolls, Johannine literature as a whole uses lexical cohesion to build incredibly dense, beautiful, almost overwhelming texture.
Lexical cohesion is all about vocabulary choice. John relies heavily on lexical reiteration, which simply means repeating keywords over and over, and collocation, which, as we noted, is using pairs or sets of words that regularly occur in the same semantic domain to build a conceptual environment.
Before we jump into the Greek text on this, I want to introduce a concept that will help this make sense, and that is theme and rime. SFL talks a lot about theme and rime. Think of a sentence like an email.
Okay, an email.
The theme is the subject line of the email. It's the head of the clause, the starting point, the thing we are talking about. The rime is the body of the email. It's the new information being given about the theme. Subject line, the meeting. Body is moved to Tuesday. Theme and rime.
That is a highly functional way to visualize it.
So keeping that email analogy in mind, let's look at the prologue of John 1.1 of 5. This is the perfect place to see lexical cohesion at work. The cohesion here isn't just structural syntax. It's what I like to call a stepping stone lexical chain.
Walk us through how John builds that chain using theme and rime.
He does this incredible thing where the rime, the new information in the body of the email of one clause, becomes the theme, the subject line of the very next clause. It creates a linguistic staircase. Let's trace it. Verse 1. In the beginning was the word, the LOH gos. He repeats LOH-GOS 3 times in the first 2 verses. It is the dominant controlling theme. Then in verse 4, we get a new piece of information. In him was life Zoe. Zoe is the new information. It was the Remi. But immediately he pivots. And the life Zoe steps up and becomes the new theme. Was the light of men, FOHS. FOHS is the new Rem. Next clause. And the light of OHS steps up to become the theme, shines in the darkness, Scotia.
That is breathtaking when you slow down and trace it. From LOH-GOS to Zoe to FOHS to Scotia, word to life to light to darkness. What's fascinating here is the massive theological implication of that specific linguistic structure. By chaining the lexical items together in this overlapping, stepping stone manner, John creates an unbreakable semantic thread.
You literally cannot separate them without destroying the sentence.
Exactly. You cannot isolate his doctrine of creation, the word from his Christology, the life or his Christology from his soteriology, the light shining in the darkness. The texture of the text forces them into a single, unified, indissoluble semantic unit. If you try to preach John 1.4 in him was life without understanding its lexical dependence on verse 1 and its cataphoric drive toward verse 5, you are dissecting a living organism.
That is such a vivid way to put it. You are preaching a severed limb. You aren't preaching the text. You are preaching a fragment. And then when we turn back to 1 John, we see lexical cohesion functioning powerfully through those oppositional collocations we talked about.
The binary collocations. 1 John builds this incredibly stark, contrastive texture by constantly pairing ethical and spiritual opposites.
It is relentless. Light versus darkness, FOHS and Scotia. Truth versus lie, aletheia and piasividos. Love versus hatred, agapio and misio. Life versus death, Zoe and Cs Natas.
And what is crucial for an MDiv student or a pastor to notice is that these lexical pairs form cohesive fields that span across chapter divisions. They aren't contained to a single paragraph or pericope. This architectural design allows the author to circle back, to revisit and re-examine core ethical and doctrinal criteria from multiple angles, while maintaining a perfectly consistent linguistic register throughout the entire epistle. It is how he weaves the whole letter together.
Let's shift our focus to conjunctive cohesion, because I will be honest, this is a massive stumbling block for a lot of first-year Greek students, myself included when I was learning it. Conjunctions in the Greek New Testament express semantic relations between whole propositions, not just constituent links within a sentence. And the biggest, most notorious culprit in the Gospel of John is the word oon.
Yeah, OON. Traditionally, practically every standard lexicon will tell you to gloss it as therefore or so.
Right, you learn it as a strict marker of logical result. It was raining OAN, I grabbed my umbrella. But wait, are you saying the standard lexicons like BDAG are wrong? Because if I read ON as a strict logical therefore in John's narrative, half the time it doesn't make any sense. Is there a layer of meaning we are ignoring?
The lexicons aren't wrong about its core semantic meaning, but they often fail to capture its discourse function. SFL reveals that in Johannine narrative discourse, ON frequently functions less as a local logical result and more as a global discourse cohesive tie. It operates at the macro level.
Give me a concrete example of that, because that is a huge shift in how to translate.
Take John 4.28, the story of Jesus and the woman at the well. Jesus has just declared his messiahship to her. I who speak to you am he. The very next verse says, so the woman left her water jar and went away into town. The Greek is aphaken ON, hutonis hydrine autos hygener, aphaken ON left therefore.
Right. And if we force this strict philosophical logical therefore onto that text, it sounds totally disjointed. Jesus is the Messiah, therefore she left her water jar. Leaving a ceramic jar isn't the logical, syllogistic result of the messianic secret being revealed.
Exactly. The logic breaks down if you treat it just as sentence-level grammar. But if we view LON through the lens of SFL cohesion, it makes perfect sense. It isn't just a local logical result. It signals a macro-level narrative transition. It is the author moving the camera. It transitions the text from theological dialogue back to narrative action. It ties her physical, urgent action cohesively back to the weight of his spiritual declaration, holding the entire episode together as a single cinematic unit. It's a scene shifter.
It's the Greek equivalent of a stage direction. Scene ends, action resumes. We see a similar macro-level conjunctive tie in 1 John, but this time with an adversative conjunction. OLAH, meaning but.
Oh, 1 John 2.19. This verse gives commentators and pastors massive headaches.
Let me read it and you can hear the theological tension. They went out from us, but all LAH. They were not of us. For if they had been of us, they would have remained with us. But all LH, they went out so that it might be revealed that they are not all of us.
The double all LH?
Yes. Why does he use this double adversative tie?
We have to look at the pastoral reality of the text. The author is dealing with secessionists, false teachers who have fractured the church and physically left the community. By using this double adversative tie, he is setting up a highly complex, deeply painful contrast. He is contrasting their physical departure from the building with their fundamental lack of spiritual belonging. The cohesion here serves a deeply pastoral and polemical function. It resolves the theological confusion and trauma caused by the schism. The grammar itself is drawing the theological boundary line to protect the flock that remained.
That is profound. Grammar as pastoral care. Let's look at one more cohesive tool before we talk about the ultimate pulpit payoff, and that is ellipsis in dialogue. Specifically, clausal ellipsis. This is the omission of a whole phrase because it is mutually understood by the speakers.
John uses this extensively in his dramatic dialogues to create intimacy and rapid pacing.
The absolute best example is Johannine, the healing of the man born blind. It's a masterpiece of dialogue. In verse 35, after the man has been thrown out of the synagogue, Jesus finds him and asks, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" The man says, "Who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" Jesus replies, "You have seen him, and it is he who is speaking to you." And then in verse 38, the man responds. In our English translations, it usually says, "Lord, I believe."
But what is it in the Greek?
It's just two words. Pis, T-Y-O-O-K-O-R-E. I believe, sir, or I believe, Lord.
Notice what is missing from that sentence structurally.
He leaves out the entire complement of the clause. He doesn't say, I believe in the Son of Man, or I believe that you are the Messiah, or even I believe in you. He just says, pis, T-Y-O.
This is a textbook example of clausal ellipsis. The structural position for the object of his belief is left totally empty. But it is not a textual error, and it's not the author being lazy. It is a profound, cohesive tie. The reader and the original listener is forced to retrieve the missing complement from Jesus' prior question.
It forms this incredibly tight, intimate, interpersonal tie across the speaking turns. It binds the man's faith inextricably and exclusively to Jesus' specific identity as the Son of Man. The ellipsis forces the two characters' dialogue to interlock like puzzle pieces. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
It shows a level of relational intimacy that a full, clunky sentence would actually ruin.
It truly is. Now let's connect all of these micro-observations to the bigger picture of how a text functions in the real world. Halliday and Hasan emphasize that texture requires two things to exist: internal cohesion, which is all the ties we've just been discussing, and consistency of register.
Right. Register is the context of situation. It's the environment the text lives in, who is speaking and who is listening.
And SFL breaks register down into three specific components: field, tenor, and mode. If we take these three categories and compare the Gospel of John and the Epistle of 1 John, we see exactly why their cohesive strategies are so different, even though they share very similar vocabulary.
Okay, let's map this out. First, field. The field is the social action, the subject matter. In the Gospel of John, the field is primarily narrative, the identity, the miraculous signs, the public mission, and the passion of Jesus as the incarnate Son of God. But in 1 John, the field is totally different. It is pastoral exhortation, a fierce polemic against false teachers, and laying out the ethical criteria for genuine Christian fellowship.
Exactly. Different fields require different tools. Now look at the tenor, the role relationships between the participants. In the Gospel, the tenor is an evangelist narrating past events to a broad community, combined with Jesus interacting with disciples and opponents. It's somewhat distanced. But in 1 John, the tenor is highly intimate. It is an apostolic father figure directly addressing a beloved community that is terrified and reeling from a schism.
He literally calls them little children repeatedly. The intimacy is baked into the tenor.
Yes. And finally, the mode, the rhetorical channel and role of language. The Gospel is a written narrative discourse meant to convey a story, heavily utilizing dramatic dialogue. 1 John, however, is a written homiletic epistle, a hortatory discourse full of direct address, warnings, and cyclical, repetitive reasoning.
So when you put it all together, the register dictates the cohesion. Because the author of the Gospel is writing a narrative, the mode about Jesus' historical life, the field, to a broad audience, the center, he's forced to rely on anaphoric participant chains, like we saw with John the Baptist, just to keep the characters straight. And he relies on spatial or temporal conjunctions like "o" to move the narrative scenes along.
But because the author of 1 John is writing an urgent pastoral homily via a cyclical epistle, He leans heavily on completely different tools. He uses those cataphoric demonstrative ties, the forward-pointing drum rolls like hautate, to grab their immediate attention, and he uses dense lexical reiteration of words like light, love, and truth to relentlessly hammer home his ethical tests for the community. The theology dictates the grammar.
So what does this all mean? We promised a payoff at the beginning of this deep dive. If I am a busy pastor prepping for Sunday or an MDiv student sweating over a 15-page Greek exegesis paper, how does understanding Halliday and Hasan's cohesion actually change my workflow? What is the practical application of knowing the difference between anaphora and cataphora?
First and foremost, embracing this SFL framework is the ultimate cure for the isolated verse disease.
Oh, say more about that, because that is an epidemic.
We have a terrible habit in the modern church, often encouraged by the way our Bibles are printed with tiny numbers and subheadings, of treating verses like self-contained proverbs or isolated, standalone propositions. But reading the Greek New Testament through the lens of cohesion definitively proves that meaning is not contained in a single verb or a single sentence. Meaning is distributed across multi-sentence semantic edifices. You can no longer, in good conscience, preach a single verse in a vacuum. You must preach the semantic edifice.
Which means you can't just preach God is light from 1 John 1.5 as an abstract theological concept without also preaching the cataphoric drumroll that set it up and the incredibly dense lexical chain of light versus darkness that follows it and defines it. The verse isn't the text, the texture is the text.
Secondly, this framework provides massive exegetical precision, which is what every scholar and pastor wants.
Yes, preventing theological fallacies.
Exactly. Knowing the exact direction of a cohesive tie prevents you from misidentifying reference. If you know how to rigorously test whether a pronoun like hotos or nasis is pointing anaphorically backward to a previously stated concept, or pointing cataphorically forward to a brand new revelation, you save yourself from pulling a completely wrong theological conclusion out of the text.
It takes the guesswork out of exegesis. It's no longer just, well, I feel like this word refers to this idea because it preaches well. You actually have an objective linguistic framework to prove it. And thirdly, and I think this might be my absolute favorite application for pastors in the trenches, it guarantees thematic integrity for your sermon outlining.
Because the text practically outlines the sermon for you.
Exactly. If you recognize a lexical chain, like the relentless repetition of the word meh, no abiding in John 15, or the oppositional collocations of love and hate in 1 John, you don't have to invent a clever, alliterated three-point sermon structure out of thin air. The author has already given you the rhetorical macro structure. The cohesive ties are the actual load-bearing pillars of the argument. You just build your sermon around the pillars John already poured.
And when you do that, you are honoring the architectural integrity of the author's thought, rather than just strip mining their vocabulary to build your own theological soapbox.
We have covered so much ground today. We started at the microscopic level, staring at a single parsed aorist verb, feeling totally lost in the grammatical weeds. And we have moved all the way out to the macroscopic level, looking at the entire discourse architecture of Johannine literature. We've seen how texts are actually semantic units, not grammatical ones. We've seen how cohesion acts as the nervous system, and how specific, tangible tools like reference, lexical chains, and conjunctions bridge the gaps between sentences to build texture.
Yes. We are learning to see the Greek text not as a dead specimen pinned to a slide in a laboratory waiting to be parsed, but as a living, breathing artifact of meaning.
As we wrap up, I want to hand it over to you for a final thought. What is the one thing the listeners should mull over as they head back to their commentaries and their lexicons this week?
Consider the original context of the early church. Consider the deeply oral culture they lived in. When these epistles, like 1 John, were originally read aloud in the assembly, the audience did not have verse numbers, they didn't have paragraph breaks, they didn't even have a printed page to look back at if they missed a point.
Right, it was all auditory.
Exactly. These linguistic markers we've talked about today, the cataphoric drum rolls, the lexical stepping stones, the repetitive cohesive chains, these were not academic trivia for them. These ties were the only way the original audience could navigate the architecture of the theology as it washed over them in real time. The cohesion was their map. So the next time you sit down to study the Greek New Testament, I challenge you. Read it aloud. Speak the koinai into the room. Listen for the cohesive echoes. You might just hear the text exactly the way the first century did. And suddenly that murky diagnostic landscape we talked about at the beginning, the X-ray comes into focus. You find the forest again.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring the text, keep looking for the ties, and we will see you next time.